Okay, I can see we have a fairly critical mass with us, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the From Knowledge to Action Symposium. This is a virtual symposium taking place during Invasive Species Awareness Week that really aims to have community members, nonprofit, members of government, hear about some of the on the ground work that's happening across Ontario. And truly, the goal is for you all to be able to leave with something that you can take back to your communities to be able to prevent the spread and manage invasive species. So, welcome everyone, and let's get excited for that. Before we jump into anything, I would like to just respectfully acknowledge that there's a long history of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples on the lands now known as Canada, and the Invasive Species Center strives to show respect for their ancestors, their communities, and to them individually. We greatly appreciate the significance of lands, waters, and all living things, and offer our gratitude to the Indigenous people for their care for and teachings about our Earth. Our relationships with Indigenous communities are important, and we will continue to listen and learn how we can be in a good relationship with Indigenous peoples, the lands and waters, and all living things, and act accordingly. The Invasive Species Center respectfully acknowledges that our head office, which is where I'm coming to you from today, is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Batchewana, and Garden River First Nations, as well as a longtime settlement of the Métis people in the Robinson Huron Treaty area. This lovely artwork that you're seeing behind here was done by an Indigenous artist. Her name is Lucia LaForge. She is very lovely. She does a whole talk about how this artwork represents some of the themes that are seen in the land acknowledgement. And so I encourage you to scan that QR code at the bottom left to learn more. She could talk about it way better than I can, so it's best just to go there. We also had Ojibwe elder Barbara Nolan translate this into Anishinaabe-Moan. So definitely encourage you to check that out. A very quick background on the Invasive Species Center. We're a not-for-profit organization that mobilizes action against invasive species that harm the environment, economy, and society. I'm doing this quick spiel at the beginning, but please know that this ISAW event is brought to you by all of our partner groups, and you're going to hear from so many of them today. So on top of this here, encourage you to access all of the resources that our partners are going to be talking about, and just kind of take those call to action as well. So we have a website with lots of best management practices, species profiles, video profiles, newsletters, all the good stuff. And so definitely encourage you to sign up for our mailing list if you haven't already. So just to give a little bit of context to this event, it is Invasive Species Awareness Week. So started this past Monday and we're going to go until Sunday. But basically, Invasive Species Awareness Week is a time where we want to raise the profile of invasive species and really hammer home the importance of preventing and managing invasive species in our communities. So you might have seen it on social media, but you can use the hashtag listed here to be able to get involved, like posts, share posts, create your own post, maybe talk about something that you learned in this event. I really encourage you all to get out there and get talking about it because that is the first step in effective invasive species management. So that is my spiel done. I'm going to turn over to our lovely speakers who I have here today. So first up, I have Emily Mitchell from the Ontario Invasive Plant Council, who is going to talk to you about I think one of the most famous invasive species resources ever in the Grow Me Instead guides. So I'll turn it over to you, Emily.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. I'm just gonna get my screen share. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen.
Looks great.
Looks awesome. Perfect. All right, just give me 1 second here. Okay, awesome. Thanks so much for that, Lauren. So I'm Emily Mitchell. I'm the Science Communications and Event Coordinator at the Ontario Invasive Plant Council. And I'll be talking to you today about, like Lauren said, one of our most sought after and popular resources, which are our Grow Me Instead guides. So I'll be providing background information about why it's important to plant native or non-invasive alternatives, as it's important to know the reasons why this is crucial to help prevent the spread of invasive plants through things like gardening. I'm going to then provide a very high level overview of the guides, as I think it's best for you to go in and view the guides yourself. So just to provide a bit of background information on our organization, so the OIPC is also a not-for-profit organization. We work in partnership with professionals and community members all across Ontario. We serve as a collaborative and forum for coordinated action towards invasive plants, which pose a substantial threat to Ontario's environment, economy, and society. Through research, networking development, as well as knowledge sharing, we help support on-the-ground initiatives to prevent, detect, and manage invasive plants across Ontario. We're also the Ontario operating chapter of the Canadian Council on Invasive Species, which is a national organization whose goal is to help prevent and manage the spread of invasive species across Canada. So the OIPC actually has a bunch of free resources available on our website. Other resources that we're really well known for are our best management practices guides. These are guides that provide a comprehensive overview of specific invasive plant species. I do encourage you to check those out on our website. The ones on the screen here are all the BMPs that we have currently available. And, each year we do publish one or two new ones. So always good to kind of keep a tabs on that resource page. And then, of course, we have our Grow Me Instead guides. We have one for Southern Ontario and one for Northern Ontario. These are really great resources that can help you get started when choosing native or non-invasive alternatives for your garden. Is available for free to download from our website as well. And by planting native species in your garden, you can play a huge role in promoting pollinator habitat and in turn support local populations of insects and other wildlife. Our Grow Me Instead guides actually fall under a national behavior change campaign called PlantWise, which is a program that helps support the horticultural industry's transition to become invasive free and is helping gardeners and industry understand which plants are invasive and harmful and to make more plant-wise choices. So every spring and summer, we do promote our Grow Me Instead guides on our social media. They tend to be some of our most popular posts. So for example, in 2024, you can see that on Facebook alone, we reached over 50,000 people, which just really kind of showcases how important these resources are. So now I want to dive into some background information about why it's important to consider planting native or non-invasive alternatives. So a really good place to start is kind of defining what a native species is to begin with. So a native plant is generally considered something that has evolved naturally in a particular region, ecosystem, or habitat without having human introduction. Native plants themselves have evolved in the presence of native soils, climate, as well as in tandem with other native species of plants, animals, fungi, as well as other bacteria. Native plants do help support a greater diversity and number of wildlife that we do like to see in our gardens, things like bees and butterflies. So why are native plants themselves important? So we don't see near the number of insect species that we used to. This has become really important in the context that there has been a really rapid decline in biodiversity over the past few decades. With insects in particular, there's been a very dramatic global decline over the last 35 years, with flying insects themselves being down about 70%. This has been linked in part to the loss of native plants necessary for these insects to feed on. A lot of insects have actually co-evolved with host plants which they feed on and which are necessary for them to complete their life cycle. Many of these species will not feed on non-native plants, so without native plant species, insect populations decline. As a result of this, bird species have declined as well. North American birds in particular have declined dramatically since 1970. Many of our bird species rely on insects, and typically a lot of birds will rear their young on a diet of insects alone. And so you can imagine with the loss of native species, it really does contribute to the rapid loss of biodiversity. So there's kind of a difference between native and non-invasive gardening compared to more landscape gardening. So landscape gardening is typically chosen for aesthetic value. So a very typical neighborhood is what you see on the screen there. So plants are planted to look attractive and as accent pieces. In many cases, the origin of these species is not typically considered. This type of gardening does require a lot of maintenance in terms of water, pesticide use, and fertilizer, as well as many different cultural practices, such as trimming hedges into spherical shapes in sort of to maintain that aesthetic value. Native or non-invasive gardening really follows a different perspective. So you're planting with a different goal in mind, and that is to plant in a way that benefits wildlife and attracts pollinators. So essentially, your garden becomes an ecosystem rather than it being purely aesthetic. Another benefit is that it's a type of gardening that requires a lot less maintenance in terms of water and pesticide usage. So native gardening itself is a whole journey, but a good place to start is avoiding planting invasive plants in your garden. And so this is where our Grow Me Instead guides come in. So I defined earlier what a native species is. So it's good to also define what an invasive species is as a contrast. So an invasive species is one that has been introduced from another geographic region to an area outside of its natural range, typically due to human activity. And its presence in an ecosystem negatively impacts the environment, economy, as well as society. So there are several traits that make invasive plants, well, invasive. So first of all, they are able to adapt to a wide range of temperatures, soils, and habitat types overall, which makes it much easier for them to become established in a new area. Because they've become established in an area outside of their natural range, a lot of species have actually avoid their natural predators by invading that new area. So this eliminates the ecosystem's natural check and balance and gives the introduced species an advantage over native species that are obviously still being kept in check by their predators. Invasive plants also tend to reproduce very quickly. Either this means they produce a substantial number of seeds or they reproduce vegetatively. Both these methods, and some actually combine both these methods. And so they're able to spread very quickly and colonize new areas before native plants have even had a chance to grow. And finally, they're much more competitive compared to our native species. So, one very common way that invasive plants sort of take it over resources is that a lot of them tend to start growing a lot earlier in the spring before native plants have even started. And so they're already taking advantage of the resources such as light and nutrients over the native species. So while invasive plants have many negative impacts, plants that escape from gardens tend to have the most negative impacts on natural environments. So they can threaten and alter natural environments, which can include things like degrading wildlife habitat and impacting species at risk. So, for example, garlic mustard pictured on the left here tends to be very ecologically sensitive and high value areas such as old growth forests. In these areas, it can cause habitat loss and degradation. It also releases allelopathic chemicals, which alter soil chemistry and prevent the growth of native plant species. It also tends to grow in very dense monocultures, which will compete for light, water, and soil nutrients. Some species at risk, pictured on the screen here, the garlic mustard impacts are American ginseng, drooping trillium, hoary mountain mint, and wood poppy. Another example is periwinkle pictured on the right here, which is a very common plant that you'll see in nurseries. Also has evidence that it's allelopathic and can quickly overtake an area. It's really problematic when this happens and it infiltrates forest because it really forms a really thick mat in the understory, preventing the growth of native plant species. So why does all this matter? So according to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, invasive species are the second most significant cause of species extinction worldwide following habitat loss. And with climate change, this will play a role in range expansion of invasive plants, and they'll tend to become more widespread due to warmer temperatures. And what's the link between invasive plants and horticulture? So the horticulture and nursery trades are actually one of the primary pathways for invasive plant introductions, and they're responsible for about 31% of all invasions globally. 85% of all non-native alien woody plant species in North America were introduced via the landscape trade. Some of these species can escape cultivation and become extremely problematic. And many of them are not, the sale of many of these species is not currently banned. And so you'll see many are still available for sale or are available on the market, or even some of these plants can be purchased via mail order, which will, contribute to their spread over great distances. The OIPC has a subcommittee called the Horticultural Outreach Collaborative, whose goal is to promote the use of non-invasive horticultural plants to the public and retail sectors. And this is a subcommittee that's been responsible for our Grow Me Instead guides. And it has committee members from a wide range of organizations, such as conservation authorities, growers, nurseries, botanical gardens, municipalities, academia, etc. So now I'm going to provide a very high level overview of the guides because, as I mentioned in the beginning, I think it's important that you check out these resources for yourself. So the northern and southern guides include photos and descriptions of the invasive plant species to avoid, followed by several native or non-invasive species alternatives to replace those invasive species. The alternatives were chosen based on whether they were proven to be non-invasive or native. So note in some cases, it wasn't possible to always pair native species with that invasive species with equivalent growth requirements. And so in that case, a non-invasive species was chosen. These species were also chosen because they're easy to find in the horticultural industry or they're becoming more widely spread available. So people aren't having to go, look in a bunch of different places to get these plants. We want them to be easily accessible. And finally, they're species that have similar requirements in terms of growth, shape, garden use, as well as a potentially invasive species. So become sort of a good alternative to that invasive. So the first section of our GMI guide provides a purpose of what the guide is for, and then it defines two key terms that I defined in this presentation, which are invasive plants versus native species. This sort of context is really important because it really showcases why it's important to choose native or non-invasive alternatives. The next section of the guide, which is something that's really important to emphasize, is invasive-free best management practices, such as learning how to properly identify and properly remove invasive plants in your garden. If you are disposing of invasive plants, make sure that you're doing that properly, either by placing that material into garbage bags and allowing them to solarize in the sun, making sure that all of the viable plant material is dead before disposal, and making sure that you're not dumping yard waste into nearby natural areas or into waterways, as this is also a very significant pathway that invasive garden plants will spread. Important not to remove any vegetation from natural areas. Try to purchase non-invasive or native plants from reputable suppliers. And then, of course, share your knowledge with other people as to why this is important. The guide itself also has some background information on the Ontario Invasive Species Act, as some of the species in this guide are either prohibited or restricted, and there are restrictions on that species being able to be sold, imported, and things like that. So species that are listed here, it is prohibited to do those things. So this is what the inside of the Grow Me Instead guide looks like. So the invasive plant will be highlighted in red, and it'll provide a picture as well as its scientific name. And then it will provide some background information on its introduction, history, biology, impacts, as well as how to identify it. And it's really important to mention that the scientific name is very important because a lot of invasive garden plants will be sold under cultivars. And so it's always important to look at the scientific name rather than the common name or the cultivar name. And then all of our alternative species that are listed in the guide are highlighted in green with pictures of them as well. And in this case, there's information on garden use, its size, growing conditions, as well as what it looks like, and some additional information. This will help you sort of make a decision if that plant is right for your garden in terms of like requirements for growth and the kind of plant that you're looking for in terms of its features. The Grow Me Instead guide is also broken down into different sections. So we have first a section on invasive ground covers, wildflowers, and grasses. So this contains a total of 10 species, 8 ground covers, 1 wildflower, and 1 grass species that are both very common. And so, for example, here, goutweed, which is a very common ground cover species that you'll see in gardens, is pictured in the guide here with one of its alternatives, which is large-leaved aster. Then we have invasive trees and shrubs. So there's 2 invasive trees and then 7 shrubs included in the guide. For example, Norway maple is a very common invasive tree species that you'll see planted in urban areas. And so the encouragement here is, planting other native maple species that will do well in that environment as well. Then there are two vine species that are included in the guide here. It's one of the very common ones, which is Japanese honeysuckle, very commonly seen in gardens. And so you can avoid that by planting a native or non-invasive honeysuckle species, such as gold flame honeysuckle pictured here. And the last section of the guide will include some aquatic invasive species. So there's 8 aquatic invasive species included in the guide right now. So for example, we have yellow iris, which is again very common in water gardens. And the encouragement here is, you can choose the native iris species, such as the northern blue flag iris. And then the guide will also has one page at the end, which has some additional alternative species that you can consider to plant in your garden. So I encourage you to visit the OIPC website and check out not just the Grow Me Instead guide, but all of our resources. We do have a Grow Me Instead update that is in the works, so stay tuned for details when that becomes available. In order to stay tuned for updates, you can either subscribe to our mail list or follow us on our social media. And that's all for me. So I'll pass things over to you, Lauren.
Great. Thanks, Emily. Friendly reminder for all, our speakers, including Emily, will be coming back for a panel discussion at the end. So I'm going to address all questions there. If there is a bit of time between each presentation, I'll also try and do that. But having said that, we're going to get moving right along to Brooke Schreier, who is joining us next from Ontario's Invading Species Awareness Program, which is part of the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters. So I'll pass it over to you, Brooke.
Thanks, Lauren. Hopefully you guys can see my presentation there and you can hear me. I'm going to keep my camera off just because I am seeming to have some bandwidth issues. So hopefully that's okay. And I'll jump right in here. Okay, so thanks everybody. And thank you to the Invasive Species Center for hosting this webinar and for inviting me to speak. Today I'll be speaking to you folks about a great program that we've been running for, I guess, going into our 5th year now, or 4th year, I should say. And so we're going to be talking about Chinese and banded mystery snails, and then we're also going to be talking about the mystery snail management and removal program that we have within the Invading Species Awareness Program, and the great collaborative work that we do with our partner, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. And just to kick things off, I am the advisor with the Invading Species Awareness Program. I've been with the program since 2015, so going into my 10th year now, and I've worked on all sorts of different aquatic species, all sorts of different aquatic invertebrate species specifically. But I also do work on fishes, so invasive carps. I run the Wild Pig Surveillance Program and oversaw the creation of the Mystery Snail Program. So I'm kind of a jack of all trades, and I also oversee the reporting tools for the province, so the Invading Species Hotline, and also the Early Detection and Distribution Mapping System, so EDMAPS, which I'll talk a bit more about in a few minutes here. So let's jump on in. So just to kick things off, who is the Invading Species Awareness Program? So we were started in 1992 as a partnership program between the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, our host organization, and the Ministry of Natural Resources. The Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters is Ontario's largest not-for-profit fish and wildlife conservation organization in Ontario. We have 100,000 members, subscribers, and supporters, including 725 membership clubs. And within the organization, we have a number of conservation programs, and the Invading Species Awareness Program is one of those conservation programs. So our mandate as a program is really focused on the education and awareness of aquatic and terrestrial invasive species in Ontario, really trying to elevate people's baseline knowledge around invasive species so that they can work towards preventing the spread. And, as Emily talked about in the previous presentation, using alternative species so that we're not, adding to the problem by planting invasive species. We also focus on key pathways of introduction. So boaters, anglers, trail users, essentially anybody who's on the landscape can be at one point or another, spreading invasive species. So just making sure that people are aware of how to identify them, how to, decontaminate equipment so that they're not, adding to the problem once again. Then, as I mentioned already, we oversee the monitoring and early detection tools for the province. So the invading species hotline, which is 1-800-563-7711. You can call that Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and have a conversation with our staff. You see a few of my colleagues there, and then the photo there, that's from the Toronto Sportsman Show last year. And so if you want to give us a call, you can talk to us about invasive species. You can report invasive species. You can get access to some of the best management practices guides that Emily mentioned that OIPC has spearheaded in the past, as well as so many other things. We also support surveillance, control, and response. Just a few listed here: water soldier, invasive carps. The invading species hotline was responsible for the largest capture of invasive carps in the history of Ontario back in 2017, when a gentleman from Lake Gibson down the Welland Canal reported a grass carp, and it actually led to on-water work by the federal government, which pulled out 10 grass carp. So you can see how those tools work, and that was a perfect example of how they should work. Somebody found something, reported it, we passed it along to the government responded and got those fish out of the water. So let's talk about the species that we're actually here to talk about today in the program. So you see two different species there in the top photo. On the left-hand side, you see the larger Chinese mystery snail, and then on the right-hand side, you see the smaller banded mystery snail. These are both invasive mystery snails that were introduced to Ontario's waters. They both have gills and an operculum. An operculum is like a trap door, and it is one of the identifiers that you can use to differentiate the species from some of our native species. So the Chinese mystery snail is actually native to Asia. It was introduced to the San Francisco region back in the late 1800s. It was first seen in the markets of San Francisco, and because it is a food item. And then the next year, it was actually seen in San Francisco Harbor. And then over the next 130 or so years, it has spread kind of across the continental United States, and then it made its way up into the Great Lakes, and then unfortunately into our inland lakes here in Ontario. And then the banded mystery snail, it's actually native to North America from Florida to Illinois, but it does not have a native range within the Great Lakes, nor does it have a native range within Ontario. So this was, again, a species that was introduced to our waters and has been spreading ever since. So let's talk about some of the impacts. I mean, you can see the impacts from those two images. The image on the right is a die-off of banded mystery snails. So this might bring back, nightmares or memories of the zebra mussels, and when they were first invaded Ontario back in the early 90s, and they'd wash up on shore, and then you'd walk all over them, and they would do damage to your feet, or they would just be unsightly. In this case, they would smell. And then the top left photo there, you have a wheelbarrow full of Chinese mystery snails. So why are these guys a problem? Well, they outcompete our benthic species, our benthic native snails and other species. For food and space, and they also reproduce very quickly. So Chinese mystery snails can have up to about 100 embryos every reproductive cycle, so once a year. And then banded mystery snails usually have up to about 80 offspring every year. So it is an exponential growth once you have an established population and they start going through that reproductive cycle. They're also a vector for transmitting parasites and diseases, so potentially intestinal flukes, and have been linked to die-offs of waterfowl down in the US, and trematodes. And then there's also a direct correlation between the amount of snails in a water body and swimmer's itch, which if you've ever had swimmer's itches, it's not pleasant. They're also suspected to predate on fish eggs, so potentially, bass spawning and those types of things. They can clog water intake pipes, and they impede recreation. A big one is impeding people's ability to enjoy their shorelines, as you can see here from these images from the Grass Lake. So here's the current, well, this, not super current, but this is the distribution of Chinese mystery snails from last year. And it shows you the distribution of this species within the Great Lakes Basin. So all the way over to Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio, and then of course, Ontario. You have a large distribution of this species kind of across the Great Lakes region. And then within the focus, the geographic focus of our program, you see the Haliburton County and its borders, as well as some of the infested lakes with Chinese mystery snail. Then here you see banded mystery snail, slightly less distributed than the Chinese mystery snail, but you can still see a fairly large population. And I apologize I didn't say this, but these images are from EDMAPS, so from the Early Detection and Distribution Mapping System. It gives you an idea of what the maps look like on that system. So if you guys are interested in learning about invasive species or learning about the distribution of invasive species, go to eddmaps.org, and you can look up distribution maps for all the various invasive species that we track in the province. But again, you can see here, established large populations over in Minnesota, Wisconsin again, and then all the way over in Ontario. And just again for focus, in the Haliburton County area, some of the infested lakes with banded mystery snails. So how did the program start? So what we can tell from the earliest data that we have is that the region was invaded back in 2013. So we're talking, 12 years ago. And then the Coalition of Haliburton Property Owners Association, or CHA, came to us for advice back in 2021, just simply looking for some advice on Chinese mystery snails, banded mystery snails, and just to have a conversation, really more than anything. But then we started talking about, what can we do? What can be done, in regards to this species? And so we decided that, after looking into the legality of removing snails and, the fact that snails do fall under the classification as fish under the Federal Fisheries Act, which meant that we weren't allowed to just take them out and euthanize them. We did require a license to collect fish for scientific purposes. And that's what that is there, the LCFSP. That's the license to collect fish for scientific purposes. So we pursued that, and we worked with the MNR closely, and CHA was amazing in helping us through this process, and we assisted in terms of our expertise and kind of leading the process while they were such a great support. And in so doing, we were able to get the license to collect fish for scientific purposes in the first year of 2021. And what we were thinking is that surveillance and management are really key tools in our toolkit when it comes to combating invasive species, which you can see here on this graphic, which is kindly provided by the Invasive Species Center. You can see that prevention is obviously the greatest economic returns, 1 to 100. But then once something is established and reproducing, you start to see that curve go up, the cost goes up, and then you get into eradication and containment. And then even beyond here, what you're not seeing is management. So we're really in the management stage of these species in these regions. There are still a lot of regions in the province which we would still be in that prevention stage. And that's why it's so important that people understand that, despite an invasive species being in one region, it's vital that we don't allow it to get elsewhere, because these things will begin to have economic impacts, environmental impacts, social impacts in all those areas where they're introduced after its initial introduction. But the main thing we wanted to do with the program was set expectations, right? Because we're so far along in this graph, we knew that the likelihood of eradication was basically impossible. But what we wanted to do is provide people with that agency to protect their shorelines, to clean up their shorelines, to legally remove mystery snails. And the group was just more than willing to get on board with this program. So this is who they are. This is the CHA, and they represent 27 lake and property associations. And we did 3 separate training events back in 2021. These were delivered via Teams. Obviously, we were at the height of COVID at that time. So that was also an inspiration for this program. A lot of us who are typically out presenting in person to lake associations, cottage associations, we're kind of cooped up in our house. And I was thinking to myself, like, what could we do? What programs could we get up and running so that people could get out on the landscape and socially distance, but also contribute towards something greater. And this was one of those programs. And it's been fantastic ever since. Fortunately, we've moved away from the social distancing and those types of things, but it hasn't diminished the passion of the group. And this year, which you'll see in a bit, I'll show you some numbers, but it's been the largest year we've had for our volunteer numbers. The nice thing about this group is that they helped us gain support from local governments, from municipalities. They also worked out details around the waste facilities and worked with them to ensure that our licensed volunteers could take mystery snails to those waste facilities as a means to dispose of them. So CHA has been pivotal. Their volunteers have been pivotal and have really made this program what it is today. And you can see the numbers. So between 2021 and 2024, we had everywhere from 250 on the low end to 424 licensed volunteers under that license to collect fish for scientific purposes out there removing mystery snails. So just a quick overview. I'm not going to get into this too much, but again, the big things you need to know is that these snails fall under the Fisheries Act as fishes. So we had to set parameters around that. And obviously this is why we needed this license. And each of these volunteers are listed under this license, and they're required to have it on them when conducting management. So just in case they do get stopped, if a CO asks them like, "Hey, what are you doing?" and say, "Well, here I'm working under this scientific collector's permit." So it keeps everything legal while also affording us the opportunity to remove these invasive snails from our waters. And now a really great thing about the program and the training sessions that we provided was it was educating folks not only on the invasive snails and how to identify them, but also how to identify native snails that we do have in the area. We obviously don't want any bycatch. We don't want people accidentally euthanizing native species. So things like Campyloma decisum, or brown or pointed mystery snail, which is a native variety that we have. We made sure that we're educating them on how to differentiate from that, as well as our native ram horns, great pond snail, as well as a few others. So, the group has been amazing in all of that. And there's been, I think, only one circumstance where I think a native snail was disposed of. Now, jumping into what a day of removal looks like. Again, I'm not going to read this to you, so if you'd like to snap a photo, go ahead. But this is just some of the things that we've taught them to do. It's pretty basic. Collect your necessary tools, your bucket, gloves, hand rake, cell phone, etc., for taking photos, and then finding a suitable location that's knee deep, waist at most. The main priority for this program is the safety of our volunteers, right? Like, we never want anybody, falling in or hurting themselves while removing mystery snails. We want them to be, out there enjoying nature, learning about nature, removing these invasive snails under their license to collect fish for scientific purposes, and then spreading the word in their communities while they're doing it. Neighbors, I'm sure, have come along and asked, like, well, what are you doing? And then the word gets out there, and then our volunteerism, our volunteer base grows, and then that assists us in our ability to remove these invasive snails from our waterways. So here are some photos from our dedicated volunteers. Like in the top right there, she's pretty deep. She's getting in there. And then some other folks, in knee deep waters on their shoreline, just again looking for Chinese banded mystery snails, using all sorts of tools that are legally allowed under the scientific collector's permit. You see those nets there; those are permitted. Anything under a meter is identified in the license. So we've also provided them with sand flea rakes. If you don't know what that is, Google it. They're an interesting apparatus that allows them to remove snails from the water. And then here's just one little case study from Koshlong Lake, Camp Wanakita. This was a number of years ago. I went the first day and I removed 765 adult Chinese mystery snails. And then I went, well, we need more people here. So we went back the next day and we removed an additional almost 2,400 Chinese mystery snails. You can see them there, like they're almost like golf balls. And this is a recreational area for Camp Wanakita where there's kids swimming and, all sorts of people coming and enjoying the landscape and just enjoying the beach. And, it's pretty unsightly when you have these thousands upon thousands of Chinese mystery snails just littering the water. So here's a map from 2023. I'm sorry, it's outdated just a little bit. We don't have an updated one for 2024, but it shows you all the water bodies that were participating. So we had volunteers on all these different water bodies in 2023. And then, so let's get into some stats. I'm just going to quickly run you through the stats for each year. So here's the stats after the pilot year. The pilot year was just crazy. You can see in the top left of the image there, banded mystery snails removed almost 500,000 by hand, counted by volunteers. Like, you're talking about dedication. These individuals, were counting these things to ensure that we had proper data. And, that being said, one thing I haven't talked about is data collection. We do provide them with links to a Google Doc, or a Google form, I should say, which is just a really simple way of collecting, pertinent information. How long did you monitor? How far did you monitor along your shoreline? How many snails did you remove? Did you encounter any native snails? All sorts of data, which is pertinent to us when reporting. So you can see, this data is demonstrated here in this graphic. And the really cool thing is, after the first year, we had over 500,000 mystery snails removed, and we had 7 CBC interviews. I did 7 CBC interviews all back to back on the radio, and there was a lot of interest abroad for this program, which was really a novel approach to dealing with mystery snails. You look at elsewhere, and the only other method I've heard used is using various pesticides to try to get rid of these snails, and that's always been in an offline system, so like a pond, but it's never been very effective because, again, they have that operculum, that trap door, so they have that inherent ability to withstand, desiccation or being dried out, or even being targeted by something like a pesticide. So removing them physically, though, they didn't prepare for that, and here we are with, in the first year, over 500,000 mystery snails removed. So jumping into year 2, here's some notables. Through the collaboration with the CHA, we were also able to install 100 clean drain dry signs around public launches in that area. So that's just showing you a secondary benefit of this program, right? Like getting that word out there, getting onto the landscape, talking to people. It afforded us, that reputation, and then those conversations that led to, well, hey, why don't we do this while we're here? And this is what happened. CHA spearheaded it. They gave us a map of all the locations where they gained permission to have these signs installed, and then we went out and installed a good chunk of them. But then a bunch of CHA volunteers also went out and installed signage. So again, just such a foundational partnership, really trying to make a difference on the landscape. And what you will notice in the numbers is a much lower harvest than the previous year. And I'm not going to sit here and assume that it's because of all the amazing work from the year prior. Now, the one thing that people should know that are listening is that these snails are specific in the way that they reproduce. They actually incubate their young within their uterus. So they are males and they are females, which is also, somewhat unusual for snails. A lot of snails are hermaphroditic, but these ones are not. And so it affords us an opportunity to pull snails out before they're able to reproduce, hence the entire motivation for this program, right? If these things were releasing their young in, May, June, it would be much more difficult, but they don't release their young till, August, September. So because of that, if we pull them out in those early summer months, that means that, those females are not able to release their young. So, again, but I'm not assuming that this is why we have such low numbers in year 2. These animals, just like many creatures, are cyclical. And you can kind of see that because they live 3 to 4 years, you can actually see that in our results here. And I'll show you over the next few years. But to this point in time, we had almost 700,000 snails removed. Then year 3, we had some events held at Camp Wanakita again in Grass Lake, and we actually engaged Métis Nation of Ontario, so MNO, about this program, and they were interested in getting involved in the wild pig surveillance program as well as this program. And so we didn't land the plane that year, but I'll get into that in a minute here as I wrap up my presentation. But you can see in year 3, we removed over 248 or so thousand mystery snails. So again, a pretty big year, but not as big as the first year, which again was almost over half of what our total was to date. But at this point, we're approaching that million mark. And that was the goal that I had kind of set for myself as the program started back in 2021. I said, if we could remove 1 million snails, that would be pretty darn cool through all the amazing work of these volunteers. So then jumping into year 4, which is the most recent year, we did it, and by we, I mean, they did it. The volunteers did it. We reached that million mark, but look at the numbers from last year, 269,000 Chinese mystery snails, 173,000 banded mystery snails. You're talking about that cycle, that cyclical, reproductive, the way that they reproduce, like, and the life cycles that they have. Here we are, 3 years prior, we saw big numbers. 3 years later, we saw big numbers. So maybe this year in 2025, I'm not much of a gambling guy, but I bet you we'll see some pretty low numbers this year, and then moving into 2026. But we reached that million mark, and it was our largest year to date, over almost 1,300 hours of monitoring by volunteers. And we did this great, 1 million snail removal event in collaboration with CHA. There's some of our amazing volunteers there. We had media engagement come out. And it was a great day to just really celebrate again the success of all the amazing volunteers. And finally, MNO, so Métis Nation of Ontario this past year, they came and joined us at Camp Wanakita, and they do have plans of they have their own license to collect fish for scientific purposes, which is great, because then that means that they can add their own, membership and peoples to their own license to collect fish moving forward. So, and this is all just because of getting the word out there. So it shows you how we go from somebody asking a question, what is this? How do we deal with this? To a program. And it shows you that it takes a lot of dedication and time and passion, but we're there. So with that, thank you for having me today. I really appreciate, again, the opportunity to speak about the program. It's obviously, been very successful. And while, again, our expectations are never to eradicate these individuals from our waterways, it certainly, again, just shows you the level of passion that people have for their shorelines, for the inherent worth of their environments, and protecting native species. So thank you again.
Thank you, Brooke, for that presentation. I always look forward to it because I think I have been around since the first iteration of it. So it's awesome to see all the progress that's being made. I'm going to move on to our next presentation. I will say that unfortunately, Deanna, who is from the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Association, is unable to join us in person or in person virtually, however you would describe this. But she did send video remarks for us to listen to here to hear more about what's happening for aquatic invasive species management at FOCA. So I'm going to get started. I am hopefully going to do this properly because I live on Zoom, but if not, I will maybe rely on one of our panelists to just start yelling at me that they can't hear anything. So let's see how this goes.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today. My name is Deanna Forgy, and I'm FOCA's Programs and Membership Coordinator. And today I'll be talking about FOCA's lake associations taking action against aquatic invasive species. So I'll just share my screen here. All right. So once again, hello everyone. My name is Deanna Forgy, and I'm the Programs Coordinator and Membership Coordinator with the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Associations, or FOCA. For those of you who may not be familiar, FOCA represents waterfront property owners across Ontario, whether they live at the water's edge seasonally or year-round. Our members include lake and road associations of all sizes, ranging from small, tight-knit communities to large organizations and everything in between. FOCA members are a self-reliant and adaptable group deeply committed to preserving the future of our lakes and rivers. And while we may meet informally in casual attire by the dock, make no mistake, these are passionate individuals with a vested interest in the health of ecosystems they call home. They have intimate knowledge of the resources, unique features, and ongoing changes happening in their local environments. For years, FOCA has been working alongside our members to raise awareness about invasive species and their potential threats. Our community has been at the forefront of advocating for prevention and management, but we are also acutely aware that waterfront property owners, through the movement of boats, can serve as one of the largest vectors for spreading these harmful species. That's why it's so crucial to keep this audience engaged and educated on the dangers posed by aquatic invasive species, as well as the steps they can do to help prevent their spread. So today I'm excited to share some of the efforts of our member associations that they've taken over the years to combat invasive species at the local level. So in 2016, FOCA launched the Aquatic Invasive Species Program, which was an initiative made possible through a partnership with the Ministry of Natural Resources. And this program was designed to support the Ontario government's efforts in the implementation of the Invasive Species Act. Its primary focus was to promote the provincial best management practices among our members across Ontario, with the goal of reducing the risk of spreading invasive species, particularly through the movement of watercraft. The program was structured into two main components: outreach and education, and association projects. Through the engagement of our member associations, a wide range of on-the-ground prevention and management actions were carried out throughout the duration of this multi-year program. Since the launch of this program, FOCA has distributed several hundred invasive species signs to associations across Ontario for display at boat launches, and these signs actually continue to be circulated in place to this day. Our member associations are well versed in identifying high traffic areas with significant transient boat activity, and they have the best insight into where these signs will be most effective. So community boat wash stations are also an effective solution for preventing the spread of invasive species, offering boaters an easy way to clean their boats before entering and leaving the lake. The Lake St. Peter Property Owners Association in Hastings Highlands recognized the potential for invasive species introduction at the Lake St. Peter Provincial Park, with over 12,000 vehicles visiting the park annually. To address this, they used program funding to purchase a power washer for boat cleaning. The association secured approval from the provincial park management to install the washer at the park entrance, along with a clean, drain, dry sign to encourage boaters to clean their boats. They also made educational literature available in the park office to inform visitors about aquatic invasive species. The wash station was installed in early August 2018 and has been widely used by campers, as shown in the photo on the screen. Next, I'll share an example from the Tea Lake Property Owners Association in the Township of Severn. They applied to FOCA's AIS program to establish a baseline profile of their lake to assess current conditions and determine if any AIS were present. FOCA provided the association with two biologists who conducted a lake-wide survey to identify native plants and check for invasives. The survey found Eurasian water milfoil, but also highlighted beneficial native species that help compete with invasive plants. The biologist spent a day with the association, reviewing the invasive species spread and control methods, and produced a detailed report on the lake's plant profile. Since receiving the report, the association has shared it with its members and posted it on their website, and their lake stewards plan to incorporate this information into their future initiatives. The association has also reported that their ongoing education efforts are helping to correct myths about the lake's weed population and promote better stewardship practices across the lake. This project has been a success, demonstrating the power of investigation, outreach, and education in driving environmental commitment, such as the Clean, Drain, Dry message. So the Otter Lake Landowners Association in the Rideau Lakes participated in FOCA's program to manage their European frogbit populations and educate residents and visitors about its threats. European frogbit is an invasive aquatic plant that grows rapidly, forming thick mats that crowd out native species, and they hinder recreational activities and reduce biodiversity. To address this, the association organized 8 frogbit removal days with over 15 volunteers and student helpers from the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority. Their efforts were highly successful, removing several trailer loads of frogbit. They plan to continue this work annually, and the project has had a positive impact on the 300 residents, campers, and visitors, as well as the native species in the lake. This initiative successfully focused on control, management, and eradication. So these were just a few of the over 50 projects that were completed as part of this program. And as you can see, a lot of prevention and management actions took place. So for the past several years, FOCA has had the pleasure of working with conservation partners on the Green Shovels Collaborative. The collaborative is a group of organizations with a shared interest in protecting nature and the economy. And through this collaborative, FOCA has been able to fund several on-the-ground Phragmites projects. So next, I'll go over a few examples of these projects. The Eagle Lake Conservation Association in the township of McCarr completed a project aimed at controlling invasive Phragmites around Eagle Lake. They purchased a portable ramp to help remove vegetation from the water to dry land, along with a thatch rake for raking invasive Phragmites and a brush cutter. Over the course of 4 days, volunteers worked to cut and remove all the invasive Phragmites growing in or near the lake, and the removed material was safely transported to the McCarr Township landfill, where it was then burned and effectively reducing the spread of this invasive species at Eagle Lake. Next, we had the Gan Lake Lane Cottage Association, located in the township of Rideau Lakes, and they implemented a comprehensive approach to tackle invasive Phragmites around Gan Lake. They partnered with Dr. Janice Gilbert from the Invasive Phragmites Control Center to develop a long-term treatment plan for their area. In the short term, the association used funding to purchase tools recommended by Dr. Gilbert for cutting a medium density stand of invasive Phragmites that was in the water. And they also focused on outreach and education by placing notices in local papers, displaying posters at the local libraries, and distributing pamphlets to residents. Additionally, they held a presentation on invasive Phragmites at their annual general meeting to raise awareness among their members. So the final program I'd like to discuss is the Invasive Species Awareness and Monitoring Program for Lakes Education Ontario, or iSample On for short. Launched in 2021 by FOCA in partnership with the Invasive Species Center, the program aimed to conduct outreach, education, and sampling for invasive mussels and spiny waterflea in Canadian Shield lakes. In year 1, we selected 25 lakes based on water calcium levels through expert consultation, and those that also had public boat access. FOCA connected with these lake associations and sent out 25 sampling kits and trained about 50 volunteers from 25 associations via webinars and materials. Volunteers collected 3 water samples using plankton hull nets and 1 eDNA sample, which were then sent to the ISC lab for analysis. Volunteers were also encouraged to raise awareness in their communities by posting signs, sharing articles, and using social media. They received the results later in the year, along with a toolkit for protecting your lake from aquatic invasive species. In 2022, the iSample On program continued with 29 lakes selected for participation. Volunteers were trained to collect water samples from these lakes around Ontario watersheds to test for the presence of invasive mussels and spiny waterflea. Again, the success of year 2 relied on active participation from our network of community scientists. In 2023, with support from the Invasive Species Center and the Ministry of Natural Resources, we conducted pioneering research with the help of around 80 dedicated volunteers to do eDNA monitoring. eDNA is short for environmental DNA, and it's genetic material that is shed into the environment by living or dead organisms. eDNA can be shed via feces, reproductive cells, mucus, skin, or hair. We specifically targeted eDNA shed by the invasive plant water soldier. And if we detected eDNA, it signaled the possible presence of this invasive species in the lake. Early detection is essential to preventing its spread and minimizing its impact. And we'd like to thank the hard work of our volunteers who collected samples from 76 locations across various lakes. This important work lays the groundwork for aquatic plant profiling and identification that was previously unavailable, providing valuable data for the future management and prevention efforts. And finally, this past year launched another new research pilot through iSampleOn. And the focus of this year's study was to answer the research question, does eDNA sampling yield the same results as traditional sampling methods when utilized in a community science monitoring project? And the answer was yes. Zebra mussels and spiny water flea were the species of interest for the 2024 iSampleOn program. And the two sampling methods were traditional plankton towing nets and eDNA analysis. So while traditional sampling can provide a positive visual identification at the larval stage, eDNA is able to detect genetic material at all life stages and can detect species that are present in low numbers. So in 2024, 5 volunteer samplings on 5 member lakes participated in both eDNA and traditional zooplankton monitoring. And the results indicated a positive result for zebra mussels on one lake and a negative on the other 4 lakes. Both methods generated the same results in each case, demonstrating that they may be used together to provide an additional metric of validation when monitoring for invasive species. The iSampleOn program was designed to raise local awareness of aquatic invasive species and encourage public involvement in the prevention of their spread in inland lakes. So thank you to all our volunteers for their hard work and dedication to the program. And thank you so much for listening, and to our program partners who make these local initiatives possible. I truly believe through FOCA member associations, a significant amount of groundwork can be accomplished by the dedicated group of volunteers who care so much about the health of their lake. These initiatives will have enduring benefit in their respective communities via local efforts and ongoing stewardship.
Alrighty, a big virtual thank you to Deanna, who, as I mentioned, could not be here, but I really appreciate her sending in this presentation. With that being said, I'll pop Deanna's email in the chat. So if you have any questions for her, then you can just get in touch with her directly. With that, I will move us right along in our program. I see we're almost back to time, which I know I talked too much at the beginning, but I guess it all worked out. So I'm going to invite Luke King from the Nature Conservancy in Canada, and he's going to talk to us a little bit more about Phragmites management. So welcome, Luke.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you. And hello, everybody. Thank you for attending this call today. I'm just going to share my screen here. There we go. Let's do from the beginning. Can you folks see my screen okay?
I don't see anything yet. You may have to hit the final share button.
Oh, yep, I think that's the conflict. Okay, here we go.
I do see your notes there, so you may have to switch your display settings.
Thank you. Let's see.
All good.
My Zoom prowess is not great. I'm more of a Microsoft Teams kind of guy.
Yeah, there's always a new platform with each of its little nuances.
How's this?
There
Can
we
you still see
go.
my screen notes? Okay.
Yep, looks lovely.
I'm going to kill my video to save my bandwidth as well. Perfect. Okay. I get to control my screen. There we go. So hi, everyone. My name is Luke King. I work for the Nature Conservancy of Canada with Habitat Restoration Program. That's a program that currently operates out of the Norfolk, Ontario office, but it works generally on the large Ontario landscape with invasive species removal and habitat restoration, such as seeding or implementing uh, uh, ecological restoration sites. For example, introducing new wetlands and agricultural fields. So thank you for all taking the time to listen to my presentation today. I'm going to talk a little bit about a plant that a lot of you are likely familiar with already, invasive Phragmites. So I'll start my presentation by introducing some base knowledge regarding the plant, and then give a little bit of insight into how the NCC is coordinating Phragmites management in Ontario. So a little more background about me. As a coordinator with the habitat restoration team, I work specifically within Southern Ontario. So my scope of work includes Lambton County, Essex County down into Pelee Island, and I also do a little bit of work in Chatham and in Norfolk. So for those familiar, I'm quite spread out on the landscape. I've worked with invasive species removal for about 5 years now. My current role is designed to create and support landscape scale collaboration for Phragmites control. So this basically means bringing the many partners together for effective invasive species management, all in a room to develop a strategy as to where to go forward. So I also lead the implementation of the on-the-ground Phragmites control in these nature conservancy project areas. So that's would be Port Franks, Pelee Island, in Essex County, and Norfolk County again. And so I do what we call the boots on the ground work. So I do mechanical and chemical removal of this plant and have been doing so for quite some time. That being said, I've been always learning new things about this plant and the ecosystems where it's found in. So I'm excited to share some of that stuff today to help benefit our community on a local scale. So quick presentation overview. We'll start with addressing what is Phragmites, what its preferred habitat is, and its distribution in Ontario. And then I'll discuss a little bit about why is it a problem for those who don't already know. After discussing the problematic plant, I'll address landscape scale Phragmites management and what it entails. So what does landscape scale mean, and how do we generate effective work within our communities? And after we identify that, where do we go from there? We'll talk a little bit about NCC's landscape Phragmites control projects, with a specific highlight to a community-driven action in a project area that I've been working in the past 2 years. And I think it's a really great case study to showcase how the community can come together and create meaningful change on the landscape in terms of environmental sustainability. So you'll see there on the slide, it says the Lambton Shores Phragmites Community Group Overview and Collaboration and Growth. And then as we kind of finalize, we'll just have a couple takeaways to go home with of how you can help with this specific invasive species and the ongoing resources that are being developed to fight this plant. So let's get into it. So invasive Phragmites is a perennial wetland grass that forms dense near monoculture stands in wet areas. Monoculture meaning it's the only plant in the area. In 2005, it was recognized as Canada's worst invasive plant by scientists at Agriculture and Agri Canada. And that's because it has severe negative impacts on the environment, the economy, and society. So we've probably seen it all around our communities, but believe it or not, 60 to 80% of that plant is actually located underground, with the roots reaching up to 40 meters, which is 130 feet in length, which is pretty incredible to think that this is not only a problem that we get to see right in our backyards, but it's actually just the tip of the iceberg of what we're actually understanding when we're just looking at this plant from perhaps when we're driving on the side of the road. The plant reproduces in several different methods. So it can reproduce by seed, as you can see with the seed heads on the slide here. It produces using stolons and root fragments. So the plant actually climbs over the ground, creating a stolon to start new stalks of them. Very impressive plant. It grows in aquatic, semi-aquatic, and terrestrial habitats. It is dependent on the water, but it also thrives in disturbed habitats. So disturbed being perhaps a construction area with the creation of a berm or a new wetland, for example, or a disturbed habitat could also mean something on the side of the road that's periodically being mowed. It prefers standing water. It likes those quiet wetlands, the banks of lake shores and beaches that aren't seeing a lot of wave action. And it really enjoys wet fields. You can see it growing often in agricultural fields, along woodlots, and along the roadside. It is a very salt tolerant species. So again, going back to that roadside growth, it has the capacity to spread on systems that are typically not very uh, hospitable to plants. And that being said, it is sensitive to drought, low oxygen, and aquatic environments with major fluctuations, for example, tides. So you're typically going to see it in these quiet type wetlands that I have. These are a couple of wetlands in southern Ontario, just in the slide here, photos for some examples of that monoculture growth in the habitat. So how did Phragmites get here? Where is it from and why is it here? Invasive Phragmites is native to Eurasia and was both accidentally and intentionally introduced to North America. We believe it was actually accidentally arrived via contaminated soil in Ballas and intentionally introduced via horticulture in the 1800s. The plant spread rapidly throughout North America in the 1900s, and today has a worldwide distribution, is found throughout Africa, Australia, and North America. So as I mentioned, the plant has multiple ways of dispersing. It is most commonly dispersed through rhizome growth and fragmentation. So cutting this plant and moving the earth through large earth projects is actually its best way of regeneration. Local populations expand from those rhizome fragments, and new populations can actually spawn from those rhizome fragments, even if they've been removed from their original point of growth in their original habitat. The seed viability is considered to be rather low, but it can vary depending on the year and the climate that, or excuse me, the local temperature that the plant is exposed to, and it can vary across the genetics of the plant. There's some cells that are very resistant. So how does it get around? We have the natural dispersion that makes sense with, when we consider plants. We have wind, we have carrying seeds, we have wave action carrying these fragments to different shorelines. But there's also a critical human component in this with how human activity will actually help spread this plant with things like mud on boots, tires, or equipment. This could be small personal equipment such as ATVs, dirt bikes. It can also be large commercial equipment such as tractors or backhoes on wetland sites. It is very effective at spreading along roadways for that long distance dispersal component. And so, as I mentioned, it's very commonly seen in major highways in Ontario. And there's also something to be said with that human activity about cultural uses. There's use of the plant in hunting blinds. Sometimes as it is introduced to a wetland, there's lots of methods of common reed for decorative purposes in homes or in gardens. It has also been used as a privacy plant because of the nature of the plant, without regard for the invasive nature of the species. So as I mentioned, it has a rapid expansion through Ontario that occurred throughout the 1900s. It's now widespread and present in most municipalities across Ontario. Excuse me, the plant is mainly concentrated in southern Ontario, typically around areas of urbanization and agriculture, but it's also found in pockets in northern Ontario. It's common along highway corridors and roadways, which are often vectors of spread into new areas. Phragmites infestive, specifically in the northern Ontario, is considered mostly confined to the urban centers, roadsides, and shorelines. However, recent monitoring activities have revealed that there's remote areas that are suffering too now from Phragmites infestations. This is quite the challenge because once they reach those remote and very difficult to access areas, it becomes very expensive to control. It encroaches on natural resource industries, and it can start to have huge impacts on biodiversity. So given that Phragmites, we know, is present in most municipalities, this is where the coordination comes in, as we emphasize the importance of a multi-actor approach to Phragmites management. We have many collective factors here. So landscape scale Phragmites control, what does it mean? So when we talk about that, we're talking about, again, that multi-partner Phragmites control project deployed on a local geography. So first thing we do is we like to identify the stakeholders. Who are the people involved being affected by this plant? This could be private landowners. This could be large organizations or land trusts like the Nature Conservancy itself. We're looking to identify high priority sites, so areas with high biodiversity, such as coastal wetlands, lakeshore, and river edge environments. Sites where cooperation is necessary due to shared property parcels. And ultimately, this has led to several large landscape scale control projects within the NCC surrounding some of their lands. For example, the work on the entirety of Pelee Island in Norfolk, as I mentioned before. This being said, we are not the only people working on a landscape level. There are many large landscape Phragmites management projects that are underway. And so we'll get into that. But I just want to mention a couple more partners. So who does this also entail when we talk about bringing everyone to the table? We're bringing local non-government organizations. We're bringing regional conservation-oriented groups. This could be something like trail walking groups or friends of a park. It's the representatives from higher and lower tier municipalities. Their drainage superintendents and civil engineers are going to be critical components into addressing Phragmites that has spread throughout the landscape on things like roadsides. Naturally, as I mentioned, we would be including conservation authorities in this, as well as large land trusts, and importantly, First Nations communities as well, to get involved, because a lot of the nation's lands are going to share these boundaries that Phragmites has no regard for. So, as I had mentioned, there's a really interesting case study on a large landscape scale that has happened in Ontario for a little while. It started as efforts of a community volunteer group, and it grew into this multi-partner landscape scale collaborative eradication effort that kind of ties into what I've been mentioning with the coordination effort. To clarify, I did not start this project. I'm actually a partner that got on board many years after the project had been established. It's a great example, I think, of what can start as a regional community effort and really grow. So we'll start with how it started. So the Land Shores Phragmites Community Group, organized in 2009 to address Phragmites on beaches and in natural areas in Lambton Shores and in Ipperwash. They focused their efforts on community education and used the draw of the public beaches to generate interest, as well as educate the local community on how to identify the plant and how to report it to the proper agencies for monitoring purposes. Not only did they commit to educating and monitoring, they also hand-pulled and spaded Phragmites cells along the Ipperwash beaches and Port Franks wetlands, which I have to tell you, as a mechanical practitioner, this is a very tough expenditure. Spading means actually cutting that root out of the ground, and that root can go down to about 6 feet deep. So removing all that biomass, both in the summer and in the winter time, those control efforts have been initiated over 120 hectares, 300 acres, which is pretty incredible work on this by this community group. They were very successful because they explored the best management practices for site-specific treatment plans, and they partnered with organizations who had good know-how to succeed. So chief and foremost, I believe, is the Invasive Phragmites Control Center. They assisted in establishing a management plan using the existing monitoring and control framework that the community group had established. They ended up publishing this regional management plan to the municipality of Lambton Shores. That was in 2023, and collected a lot of momentum, not only within the community group, but also within partner organizations such as the Nature Conservancy and the Asable Bayfield Conservation Authority, the Invasive Species Center, and the St. Clair Region. So how it's going. So where do we see this now as I've come into this project? In 2023, the Habitat Restoration Program began canvassing the regional working group on Lambton Shores to help grow partnership into the broader scope of Lambton County. So again, this is bringing everybody to the table. We're bringing in the conservation authorities, we're bringing in the lower and higher tier municipalities, the county into it. And we started to focus our efforts around landscape peel eradication efforts on the Asaba River, Mud Creek, and the local conservation authority lands. The local community group helped found the larger Phragmites Management Area Group, who now are composed of these partners who work alongside each other to control frag on a landscape scale. So we're looking now at 2 years of collaborative effort across the landscape. Our collective partnership has actually made a grand difference, not only in the mouth of the Osceola River, but in the eradication of Phragmites in the Outer Drive wetland. You can see a map here on my slide. This is 15 hectares of Phragmites addressed in Lambton Shores. This was in 2024. This was made possible, again, by all these partners working together. We have the ABCA towing the NCC Marsh Masters, the local Phragmites community group providing treatment site notifications and biomass removal. We have the NCC and ABCA technicians actually being on the ground implementing these management techniques. And then we have the municipality of Lambton Shores providing regional outreach to help inform landowners and engage the community with what we're doing. So a couple of takeaways from this that I think relate to the Ontario community as a whole is that Phragmites control efforts really do demand that collaboration on a landscape scale. Phragmites control can be effective from within the community using best management practices. And there are resources available to address Phragmites in their land or assist in local monitoring and non-chemical methods. So we have tangible ways to change our community with Phragmites control. When we remove Phragmites, we're building environmental resilience in riverine and coastal wetlands. We're helping reduce shoreline erosion, and we're helping protect and establish biodiversity sites in Ontario. A couple of lessons that we've learned from our collaborations is that all communities have a potential to grow. There are always champions who are outside every day who can see the change that happens on the landscape scale from invasive species, who are ready to put in the work, both in terms of volunteering and dedicating their careers. In terms of invasive species in general, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and every effort taken is one bite of a large elephant. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And another lesson is that local initiatives are incredibly valuable to the long-term eco-sustainability of the region. So having those individual private land stake owners, perhaps who are constantly monitoring their properties and being engaged on the landscape will create a larger system of resilience within our communities. In terms of how can you help? You can help us build a strong network of practitioners on the landscape. There are lots of local Phragmites community groups who, in Ontario, who engage in mechanical removals for spading and also in monitoring. We ask that practitioners connect with regional Phragmites coordinators through the Ontario Phragmites Action Program to get more involved with the larger landscape work. And we also encourage engaging with local partners on existing and future management plans. So specifically, looking to volunteer perhaps with the NCC or an organization like the Conservation. I just want to say thank you to Lauren and to the Invasive Species Center for hosting the Invasive Species Awareness Week Symposium, and to my other colleagues presenting alongside me today. I hope everybody enjoys the presentations. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, Luke, for that presentation. always love talking about frag. I feel like there's never going to be a presentation where we don't talk about it. So appreciate your insights into that. Next up, I am going to invite Matt Bolding, who's with Ducks Unlimited Canada. And Matt is going to speak to us about developing new tools for innovative invasive species management. Welcome, Matt. I'll let you take over.
I realize I'm muted, but I will try and share my screen. Okay. Are we seeing the correct thing?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Lauren, and thanks for having me here today to speak about developing new and innovative tools for invasive species management. I'm going to be specifically speaking about our drone and AI tools that came out of the invasive European water chestnut management that Ducks Unlimited Canada has been doing for several years now. The sort of how those tools work and how they've really helped our invasive species management and where they're going next. So a little bit of a background on invasive European water chestnut. This is a floating aquatic invasive plant that was introduced to the US as an ornamental plant back in the late 1800s. And as these things do, it got out of captivity, or someone released it into a river or a lake, and then it traveled through the aquatic ecosystem north up into Canada. I think it worked its way through Quebec, down the Rideau, maybe into Kingston, in the Kingston area. And there's a big population on Wolfe Island, just in the St. Lawrence across from Kingston, that Ducks has been involved in monitoring. I want to point out a couple of things. European water chestnut forms this really distinct pattern of the way the leaves float on the top of the water. And they also drop these really gnarly, stabby, pokey seeds, which you don't want to step on. Like a lot of aquatic invasives, European water chestnut checks all the boxes, for being bad for the environment. They form these dense floating mats that outcompete native plants and then thus die and lower dissolved oxygen levels, which is bad for fish. They negatively impact habitat for fish, waterfowl, and other wildlife. They're bad for human use, recreation, and navigation. And like I said, they drop those little caltrops that you can step on, which aren't great. As I mentioned, there was a large population that was found on Wolfe Island, just across from Kingston. And DUC began to get involved with that work back in 2014. And this sort of involved what I called an integrated monitoring and management approach, where our team would go out on the water in a boat or a canoe, and they would survey visually looking for floating plants and then remove them at the same time, just hand pulling them from the water. This is effective. It's slow. Like, this process used to take about 5 or 6 weeks, depending on the year. And as I said, this has been going on for over a decade, so it's a slow but effective process. A few years back now, our team on the water, again, noted that really distinct pattern of the way the leaves sort of float on the water surface. And this sort of corresponded with a larger integration of drones into Ducks Unlimited general program. And the thought sort of came, well, hey, can we use drones to survey and do surveillance of the bays where we're removing this plant? Because the drone will be able to see that really distinct leaf image. So we as people will be able to notice that in the photos we can take. So our team began to do some field tests, and we were able to easily and quickly get these great images. And if you know what you're looking for, I don't know if this is going to show up on your screen, but there's this tiny little cluster of European water chestnut here. So that showed that, drones can see the plant and we as people can identify it. But that is also kind of a slow process to go through, like 1,000 images and just scan through the whole thing to try and find these plants is maybe a little cheaper than going out and taking all that time on the boat, but don't know how much faster it is. So again, we thought there's emerging technology. why don't we look at AI as a way to make this process a little faster? So Ducks partnered with a company called Saiwa to create an AI machine learning tool that uses a sort of visual matching system to scan the photos and look for that distinct leaf pattern, and then identify European water chestnut plants through that. This was a tool that was developed over a couple of years using a bunch of imagery collected over those years. And the end result was this really easy and effective tool. Basically, what happens is our field teams go out to the site where we're going to manage water chestnut, and we'll fly a drone to capture all this imagery. The imagery is then processed and entered into the tool, and the tool will scan all those images and identify the European water chestnut that's in them. And because those images are georeferenced, the drone has a GPS in it, the tool can hold the GPS coordinates of the plants that we find and output them into a file that can then just be put on a handheld GPS unit that our field team can go out on the boat and use to direct them to water chestnut populations. Really important to note that built into the design of the tool is sort of a mechanism to check the accuracy of the results. So as the tool scans the photos, you can go and look at what it's saying is water chestnut and it isn't, and either like check or X to say whether that was a correct or an incorrect ID. This is handy because this is what trains the tool to make it better. So the more images you put into the tool and the more you go through and verify them, the better the tool gets at doing this in the future. So after 2 years of developing and training the tool, this past summer, 2024, was the first year where we went out and used this tool to inform our management effort. So the photo on the left is the individual points that were identified through the AI auto detector tool. And the photo on the right are the GPS points that were taken by our technician on the boat whenever they pulled a plant. They would take a GPS point. As you can see, we haven't done a robust statistical analysis of this yet, but as you can see visually, there's a lot of similarities. They're not identical, like those points aren't going to be exactly the same between these two images, but there's a great sort of correlation between the two. And indeed, the lead on our removal team, who has been doing this for a few years now, really did highlight that this made the work go a lot faster. It wasn't, he wasn't out there being directed to every single plant, but it was enough to go to the area where the plants were to save a lot of time just going through and slowly scouting around. I have to point out a couple of things, of course. The tool has about a 93% accuracy rate, which means that 93% of the European water chestnut that is observed in those drone images is being correctly identified by the AI tool. So sometimes we get some false positives, things like European frogbit or water lilies that are damaged might be caught by the tool as being European water chestnut. And we're always going to have some misses. Sometimes there will be plants that emerge after we have done our drone flights, or plants that are obscured by other vegetation that we're just not going to see. So the drone AI tool is never going to be a foolproof method. Human surveillance is always better, but this is very, very helpful in making fieldwork more efficient and thus a little cheaper. Integrating the tool took about 3 days on the front end for the image collection. And in the end, this year, it was only 7 days of management, in large part because the field work was heavily expedited. So with that as proof of concept that this sort of design works and is helpful for invasive species management, we began to look at other aquatic invasives that have a really distinct morphology, especially when viewed from the top down, like the way a drone would see. And that brought us to water soldier, which is another invasive that is a problem in Ontario. Again, an aquatic invasive. It is a submerged plant that does emerge at some point through the season, though I think sometimes it doesn't. I'm not the water soldier expert, but we're getting there. This is a plant that kind of looks like the leaves of a pineapple, but if those leaves were aloe plant leaves instead of the broad kind of pineapple leaves that you're used to. Knowing that and knowing that this was a distinct kind of morphology, and also knowing that other folks have been using drones for water soldier before, like Parks Canada, we thought, hey, we'll try it. But we also knew there would be some challenges, because when you're trying to capture photos of submerged plants by a drone, you have a whole new wrinkle of things that'll make that difficult, specifically being underwater. So water clarity can prevent you getting good images. Reflectance on the water, like the weather is important, and the sunlight that's hitting the water, and wind as well, because the more wave action or ripples you get on the water, the harder it is going to be to see what's under there. So we worked with OFAH and went to a site with a known and mapped population. And this was Red Horse Lake, which is right by Charleston Lake Provincial Park. And we met up with some really fantastic techs who took us to these populations that they had already identified. And this was a great opportunity for us to do a whole bunch of test flights. We flew just our standard drones. We flew multispectral drones at different heights, at different speeds, with different polarized filters, to try and sort of figure out the best settings for our drone to be able to capture water soldier images. And we were successful. Not sure how well this is going to show up on people's screens, but in this red circle, there's these two slightly differently greenish blobs with a whole bunch of little black circles in them. Those two blobs are little patches of water soldier. So with that, we were like, great, hey, this works. Like, we know we can take photos of these plants with a drone. Let's see if our settings that we sort of tried to refine on Red Horse Lake will work in a location where we know water soldier is, but it hasn't been mapped with that level of precision. So we went to Cooks Bay on Lake Simcoe, where water soldier was recently found, and flew a flight to kind of test this on an unknown population. And fortunately, our settings worked. Unfortunately, we found a lot of water soldier, but we were able to capture these sort of unmapped water soldier populations with our drone. And just to zoom in on this photo a little bit more, again, you see these sort of large patches with all these dark dots in them that are the crowns of the water soldier plants in the water. So with the imagery we collected both at Lake Simcoe and at Red Horse Lake, and imagery that was shared with us from Parks Canada, who have been managing water soldier for a while now, we went back to Saiwa, the software company, and had them adapt our European Water Chestnut tool to water soldier and train it with these images that we were able to collect this past summer. I think they were working with roughly 2,200 images. And the first kind of iteration of the tool turned out to work actually quite well. This is, again, an example of an image, and all these boxes were plants that were identified by the tool. The tool had sort of initial model accuracy of about 95%, which again means that 95% of the water soldier in the images, so the water soldier that the drone can see, was accurately identified by the tool. Which is great. So the next steps with the water soldier tool is to continue to collect more imagery from different locations to further train the tool to a point where we are confident that it can be utilized to inform invasive species management. Water soldier grows in a variety of different conditions. In some places, it will become visible, like it'll emerge high enough, earlier in the summer. In some places, it doesn't sort of show up until the fall. So there's a bit of work that needs to be done to identify, like, when we should be flying drones to identify water soldier in Lake Simcoe versus the Bay of Quinte versus the Trent River. And our hope this coming summer is to collect a bunch of imagery from a variety of locations. This is just an EdMaps map of water soldier in Ontario. So we're hoping to kind of go beyond the 1 or 2 spots we went last summer. And then as the tool continues to get refined, we're hoping that we can share it with people who are actively managing Water Soldier so they can incorporate the tool into their management program in whatever way they find most effective. And a key component of that is making the tool accessible. So right now, as I said, we have a functioning tool for European water chestnut. And if there are folks who are interested in utilizing that tool, I would urge you to contact me. At this point, we don't have like a website or a kind of a public facing portal for the tool yet. That's something that's still in the works. But there is access. You just need to give me an email or a phone call and we can set that up for you. And then likewise, once the Water Soldier tool is ready to go, we're hoping to have that same sort of access available. Beyond Water Soldier and European water chestnut, we're always looking at other potential invasive species that this can expand to. So I have a very short list here of ones that have just crossed my mind because I know they're either somewhat distinct, like flowering rush has a distinct color that I think is somewhat stands out from the rest of most wetland vegetation, or something like hydrilla, which is not distinct but is a major issue as a new and sort of really troubling invasive to hit Ontario, but also its community is really large. So hydrilla is this really kind of fast-growing submerged aquatic invasive plant that was recently found in Hillman Marsh, and it forms these really, really dense patches really quickly. So we have been working with the Essex Region Conservation Authority and the University of Waterloo, who are doing some monitoring work around the management that's happening at Hillman Marsh to try and see if drones can be, well, if they can be helpful in any way. Because again, drones are really fast and relatively easy to use. And I just want to highlight this photo, which was drone images we took of hydrilla this past fall, and it's pretty dense and not a great sight. So we're hoping we can help out there. So to summarize, we sort of started with a kind of pretty standard management plan for European water chestnut and kind of capitalizing on sort of the emergence and availability of some technology. We were able to incorporate drones and AI to really kind of cut down on some of the labor required for managing European water chestnut. I mean, as great as it is to be out on the boat, that is a cost. And if we can trim that cost, that makes our management a little more affordable, which lets us maybe do more. The tool for European water chestnut has been effective. It's decreased surveillance times. It's led to a more efficient management effort. And we're really excited by the promise that it's showing for incorporation of Water Soldier. I also really like this tool as a concept because it provides an opportunity for a quick pass to scan for these invasives in an area where you are kind of, maybe you're worried that they could be present or you have some reason to think they're there. But you don't necessarily have the time or resources to get a team out on the water or to do a heavy surveillance. At least if you can get a drone out there or get someone with a drone to fly your site for you, which is relatively quickly, depending on the size of the site, you could run those images through the tool and kind of get a quick pass to see if you get any pings for chestnut or Water Soldier. Again, have to emphasize that while this tool is effective, it's never going to replace the quality of having someone out on the water doing these surveys. But it does save time and it is relatively fast. And I think it's a huge help. The auto detection portion of it, so the AI tool that scans for the specific plants, is also going to have some limitations because it can really only work for conspicuous plants. A great example is Phragmites. Frag is really easy to identify in a drone photo, but I think at this stage, telling the difference between invasive and native frag, for example, would be quite challenging. And then there's species like Eurasian water milfoil, which a drone isn't going to be able to distinguish from our native milfoil because it's just too small. So yeah, with that, I just want to thank everyone who's here and the other speakers, and just grateful to have this opportunity to talk about this work.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt, for that presentation. I have a hard time fathoming all of the stuff that goes into drone mapping, but thank you for breaking it down and giving us a little bit of an insight into that. I could ask you a ton of questions, but I could save those for offline. But encourage folks in the chat here to pop your questions into the Q&A for our panel discussion. That will start right after our last but not least speaker. So having said that, I will introduce you to the second Emily of the day. This Emily works alongside me at the Invasive Species Center. Grateful to have her as a colleague and presenting here today on spotted lanternfly. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lauren. Let me just get my slideshow up. Okay, just making sure I have it in my presentation view here. Okay, perfect. So yeah, thanks for having me. And today I'm going to be presenting I Spy Spotted Lanternfly. So it's just going to be kind of, the lowdown on what spotted lanternfly is, the risk it poses to Canada, and kind of the status of that threat right now and what you can do about it. So, spotted lanternfly, or SLF, as you'll probably hear me refer to it, just because that's a little bit less of a mouthful, is an insect in the plant hopper group. So not a fly, as the name implies, not a moth, as it might kind of look. So this bug is native to parts of Southeast Asia, and it's invasive in Japan, Korea, and most recently the United States, where it's kind of posing a problem for us. So although not exactly here yet, it is a federally regulated pest in Canada. And basically it's an agricultural pest, at least that's the aspect of it that we're most worried about. Really has the potential to devastate grape production. It's quite bad for grapevines in particular, which it has shown a high feeding preference for, but also the grapevines just seem to have a high vulnerability to that feeding for whatever reason. That being said, we are also expecting impacts on horticulture, forestry, industries, and municipal operations as well. So basically what SLF does is weakens and kills plants through their feeding behavior. They're feeding on the sugars in the plant, so that weakens them. And then they're also excreting what we call honeydew, which sounds a lot nicer than it is. It's just they're excreting that sugary waste. And so that's bad for plant life as well. I mentioned already about the grapevines, but since horticulture and forestry operations and products can be vectors of spread, those, of course, will have to be controlled. So in that way, poses a risk to those industries too. SLF is quite close to home, unfortunately. It was first detected in North America in Berks County, Pennsylvania, just over a decade ago now. So been spreading for quite some time. It's currently present in 19 states, mostly concentrated in the northeast of the US, including border states like New York and Michigan. So Southern Ontario, Southern Quebec, and Southern British Columbia are all vulnerable to spotted lanternfly. We do have a suitable climate. Might not seem that way, but research is coming out of Natural Resources Canada showing that they are, at least the egg masses that overwinter, are quite cold tolerant. We have plenty for them to eat here. Of course, we have our grape producing regions, but also Tree of Heaven is one of their preferred plant hosts that's native to their part of the world, and that is quite widespread here. So we do have that, and they're also just generalist feeders, and so there's lots of plant hosts for them here as well. And as I mentioned, we are proximate to those infestations in the US. So we are definitely expecting impacts of SLF across the economy, ecology, and society. In terms of economic impacts, just in Pennsylvania, they had millions of dollars worth of damage, largely due to yield losses from grape producers. Beautiful vineyard pictured there. Those vineyards are highly at risk from this pest. They're proving to be very costly to control in the US. We're not at that stage yet in Canada, of course, but yeah, they are costing a lot, and it's very difficult to control. And then also just in those other areas, like I mentioned, even where yield loss isn't as much of a concern, a forestry operation, for instance, might have to implement best management practices to control the spread. So that might look like phytosanitary measures, proactive monitoring, training staff. That all costs money. So big time economic impacts could be expected from that. Also, some potential ecological impacts as well. They have been documented feeding on over 100 different plant species, including valuable hardwoods that we have like oak, black walnut, and maple. That being said, they aren't usually outright tree killers. Definitely stresses the tree out. Saplings, however, can be more vulnerable. So, for municipalities that are, trying to plant trees, could be a concern for them and for nurseries for sure. I will say in terms of ecological impacts that the good news is that SLF doesn't seem to be as common in large tracts of contiguous forest, and they do seem to have a lower preference for conifer trees. That being said, those can still be a vector for spread. They'll still lay their eggs, for instance, on Christmas trees on Christmas tree farms. So yeah, they are a plant stressor, which is just one more thing that our plant life is facing. So that can reduce their resiliency to other pests, diseases, and climate change. And that's all really just from the feeding behavior, but their honeydew is also bad for plants. So when they're feeding, that honeydew will kind of gather at the base of the plant and then fosters sooty mold growth. So that's not good for the plant. It inhibits photosynthesis as well. And then in terms of social impacts, this is a novel pest. We'll see some pictures here. It's quite colorful, charismatic looking. And it also aggregates in kind of these unsightly swarms. And just, looking at what's happening in the US has been generally considered to be a nuisance. And so cities in the US have experienced just, inundation with public inquiries. So, you can only imagine people seeing this insect in Canada for the first time. They might call their city or town. So that's definitely going to be impactful in that way. And then the honeydew is also a nuisance to people. So SLF will go high up in trees to feed, and then of course when they're excreting that waste, that can fall on people. It's sticky, it's gross. It also, if it's gathering at the base of the plant, can attract stinging insects. So that's kind of, annoying to people who are just trying to enjoy their backyard or public park. Doesn't seem to be posing much more of a public health hazard than that. Doesn't bite or sting, thankfully. We don't have to worry about that. But yeah, definitely just a nuisance pest for the public. So this kind of gives you an idea of the honeydew damage. So, on the left there, that's a host tree that has probably had a lot of heavy feeding on it. And at the bottom there, you can see just all that mold growing. You can definitely see some mold on the understory plant in that top right photo as well. And just that honeydew gathering on the understory plant, sorry, in that bottom photo. So that's all just, not good for plant health. And then this gives you an idea too of just how much they can swarm. So you can see on that photo on the left there, that tree that, appears to be in, maybe like a family's backyard. There's some kids' toys in the background there. It's just covered in spotted lanternflies. They really tend to swarm and aggregate. And you can see them on that grapevine as well. So this is their life cycle. I won't go into too much detail, but it's just to give you an idea. Those months can be a little bit variable, just depending on, how far north they are. Obviously, temperature differences can affect that kind of thing, and also when exactly those egg masses hatch. But generally speaking, you could expect to see them hatch in spring. They'll go through a few different stages of development, just kind of looking like that small black insect with the white spots. Around midsummer, they at their 4th stage of development, they will turn that bright red color. And then you can expect to start seeing the adults develop in around midsummer, and they are usually quite active in September and October. So that's actually when they are, the sexes are starting to mix more, they're starting to seek out mates, aggregate, and then start laying eggs. Typically, you will see them as adults, at least, in that more folded wing position, kind of looking like a moth. It of course does have those really bright red, distinctive underwings, but you usually would only see that when it's taking flight. And then those egg masses are going to overwinter. So the adult insects, they'll die when the nights get cold enough later in the fall, but the egg masses will overwinter, and you can expect to see them at that time of year. So I just wanted to show some more close-up photos of all stages of development so you get a better idea. I want to draw your attention to how small those nymphs are. So, the biggest stage of development on the right there, the red one, is, still only a couple of centimeters. They start out quite small, it looks like less than half a centimeter there. Again, just so you get an idea, you can see in the photo on the left there, there's a couple different nymph stages there as well as an adult. And then just another couple photos of the adults. So this is, like I said, the more typical way that you would see them, just kind of with their wings folded. They're kind of pinkish, got those nice spots. A lot of people do describe them as very pretty. And you can see on the right there, those ones have just laid some eggs. And then, as I said, you would maybe see the bright red underwing when it's kind of taking flight. So you can just see that there. So those are some nice zoomed in kind of close-up photos, just so you get a really good idea of what the individual looks like. That being said, when there's an infestation, you see them in these big swarms. And you can see on that top left photo there, there appears to be sap weeping wounds on the tree. So that's actually probably from feeding damage induced by the SLF that's on the tree there. So now I want to bring us to focus on the SLF egg masses. And the reason I really want to zero in on these is because they have a lot of potential to be spread. They're very hardy, and unfortunately, they're very inconspicuous. To the untrained eye, on any given surface, this can just look like, a smear of mud, maybe a fungus or lichen, if you didn't know what you were looking at. So in that top left photo there, you can see the coating on the egg masses. The SLF will kind of coat them when they lay them, and when they do that, it starts out quite shiny. Soon, though, that will kind of dry up, might crack a little bit, such that you can actually see the eggs visible. SLF will lay about 30 to 50 eggs in a single egg mass, and then the females can lay multiple egg masses. So they're certainly prolific. But yeah, they just kind of look, the actual eggs themselves just kind of look like those little rows of almost brown seeds is kind of what they look like. But usually, the egg mass will just appear to you as kind of a smear of mud. And unfortunately, they can be laid on virtually any surface outdoors, natural, man-made, doesn't matter. I have them pictured on a couple of trees there, and that can be pretty high up too. So you can imagine if it's well above eye level, it's not something you can see up close, probably not something you're even going to notice. But yeah, firewood, patio furniture, vehicles, anything that's just like left outside, they can lay their eggs on. So just to give you an idea, that photo on the left there, that's just like a rusty pole, and the egg masses are laid kind of on the inside there. So who would notice that, right? So this becomes a big problem when it's laid unnoticed on vehicles or cargo, cars, trucks, trains, you name it, that's moving long distances, right? So the egg masses are certainly more hardy in terms of being moved those long distances than the nymphs or the adults. I do have an adult SLF pictured there, kind of trapped in some packaging. This was actually from a report in Ontario. I believe that individual was dead, so this didn't count as a detection. It was just an interception. But yeah, the adults aren't as hardy. That being said, if a gravid female, so female carrying eggs, were to get here and lay those eggs, could certainly still pose a problem. Rail is a big pathway of concern, especially given the distribution of tree of heaven along rail lines. Horticulture is another pathway. The first detection of SLF in Michigan, in fact, was on nursery stock. A couple of years ago, ISC actually hosted a webinar that just focused on the state of Michigan detection and early response to SLF. So that is available on our YouTube channel if you wanted to see that in depth. Wood products are another one. So the CFIA did come out with a risk management decision on wood products and the import requirements surrounding that. So I won't get into detail with that, but that is available for public viewing online, so you can see that. And then, of course, we could expect this to arrive from the US. I've mentioned that there are infestations close to the Canada-US border. That being said, they really could come from anywhere. So, I mentioned New York and Michigan, and there are infestations like in Buffalo, New York, for instance. So that's right at our doorstep. But hypothetically, like spotted lanternfly could just as easily get in here from Pennsylvania on a truck, for instance. So, anywhere where we're doing some kind of trade or even just people traveling from states where there are infestations, doesn't have to be close to the border. They can definitely get through. I won't go into too much detail on Tree of Heaven. I do just want to touch on it because it is the preferred plant host of SLF. So Tree of Heaven is native to the same part of the world where SLF comes from. SLF actually can kill this one. Not that we are too worried about that because Tree of Heaven is also considered invasive and not usually very desirable. But yeah, it is the preferred host, but not obligate host of SLF. So by that I mean they don't need it to survive. And in fact, getting rid of it doesn't necessarily get rid of SLF or prevent establishment of SLF just because they have so many other feeding options. That being said, at least one study showed that they can lay up to 7 times the number of eggs on Tree of Heaven as other hosts, and they also begin laying on Tree of Heaven earlier. And unfortunately for us, Tree of Heaven is quite widespread in North America. It's already been here for a few centuries, especially in disturbed areas and quite common in urban and suburban areas. I actually took these photos myself in the west end of Toronto. What we want you to do with Tree of Heaven is, one, report it specifically to EDMAPS. That's the Early Detection and Distribution Mapping System. What that does is just helps us to map out its distribution. We know it's everywhere. That doesn't necessarily mean we have it mapped out. So that can help us determine, where SLF might establish if and when it gets here. And also just monitor it for SLF. Tree of Heaven is notoriously difficult to get rid of it. It is regulated restricted, I should say, in the province of Ontario, but it's kind of already everywhere, probably not going to be eradicated. But, if you have a Tree of Heaven in your backyard or your neighborhood, and, there's maybe no chance of getting rid of it, that's still an opportunity to monitor for spotted lanternfly, because if it arrives in your neighborhood, chances are it's going to go to that Tree of Heaven. So, doesn't hurt to just take a visual scan of it and obviously report any SLF that you see. Which brings me to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's messaging on this, which is if you spot spotted lanternfly, snap it, catch it, and report it. So for spotting it, you're just, looking out for those nymphs and adults in the spring and summer. Over the fall and winter, you can still look out for the egg masses. Get a clear photo of the specimen, and then we do want you to catch it at this stage. So you might have seen messaging coming out of the US saying, to just kill it, squash it, whatever you can. Definitely still kill it in this instance, but in order for the CFIA to confirm a sighting, they do actually need the DNA. And so whether you have egg masses that you're scraping into a plastic bag or you're actually trying to catch the specimen in a container, you want to get that. You can put it in your freezer. You can put hand sanitizer rubbing alcohol in it just to kill it, make sure it's dead. But please get the specimen if you can, and then report it. So it's the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, CFIA, as you've heard me mention, that has jurisdiction over this pest because it's federally regulated. So ideally, you can report directly to them. They have an online form you can fill out. Try to get as much information as you can, precise location. If you have, information about the host plant, habitat, you could submit those descriptors as well. I'm nearing the end of my presentation, so I don't want to delve too much into this. I did mention, though, that we don't have a detection or an established population in Canada. This might be confusing if you've heard of SLF observations in Canada. So I just wanted to distinguish that there are sightings that CFIA is aware of, but because it's not confirmed by them, all they can call it is a sighting. Interceptions are confirmed by CFIA, but it means that there's no evidence of release into the environment. So either it was found dead or it was in some kind of like contained situation. So we have had sightings and interceptions in Canada. What we haven't had is a live spotted lanternfly confirmed by CFIA in the Canadian environment, and certainly much less we haven't had a breeding population. And you can look at the status of SLF in Canada yourself on the CFIA's website. If you just go to their page on spotted lanternfly, there is a link to this observation table. This is public information. You can see what kind of observation it was and where and in what month and year. You can see quite a fair bit in October and September of last year. So like I mentioned, September, October is when they're kind of active. That being said, none of these were detections, but this is where you would see that information when it comes about. I'll just end by saying that I covered very little of the information that's out there on SLF, but we have tons of resources on the ISC website. If you just start by going to the SLF species profile, everything else that I have listed there, including printed materials and a link to our online course, you can find it on that page. And if you do have any questions, you can always email me, epostorero@invasivespeciescenter.ca. But for now, I think I'm out of time, so I will turn it back over to Lauren. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Thanks, Emily, and thank you to all of our speakers who have given great presentations today. I can see that there were many questions, and some of our speakers already went in there and answered, so thank you so much for that. I invite any additional questions to be popped into the Q&A chat, and I will read them out from there. I'll invite all of our speakers back on screen if you're able to, and I will do my best to direct the questions right off the hop. But if I get it wrong, please don't hesitate to put your hand up or unmute yourself and start answering those questions. So I will introduce our pinch hitter to this panel as well. Katie Church is here from the Invasive Species Center. Katie works heavily in our aquatic invasive plant program, has led our European water chestnut removal efforts on the Welland River, and also leads our Don't Let It Loose program, talking about the release or don't release your aquatic pets. So anyways, I brought Katie here as there were some questions about that were pre-submitted. So having said that, some folks did pre-submit their questions. I'm going to be going back and forth between those and then those that are asked live. But maybe I'll get it started here. Lots and lots of interest in Eurasian milfoil and controlling that and kind of the status of it. So I already let Brooke know I'd be putting him on the hot seat for this. So I will invite you, Brooke, to kind of give some context to that milfoil removal question.
Thanks, Lauren. I appreciate the bus and being hit by it. It's a tough one. Eurasian water milfoil is so pervasive throughout almost the entirety of the province. And so I did see a question, like what's the best prevention for Eurasian water milfoil in the Q&A. And realistically, the best prevention is just that, prevention. It's preventing the species from arriving in the first place. And this is why we do what we do, education outreach. Now, unfortunately, Eurasian water milfoil has been here since the 1960s. It's a suspected introduction via ballast water, and ballast water is now regulated in the province. So we don't necessarily have to worry about that pathway quite as much as we did pre-2006. But that being said, Eurasian water milfoil, as I said, is kind of throughout, southern, southwestern, central, eastern Ontario, all the way up to, northwestern Ontario. So in terms of its management, there are options that do exist. There is a government website, which I can link in the chat after I'm done answering the question. And so it does permit property owners to conduct aquatic plant removal. Now, when you have a large population of Eurasian water milfoil in a water body, my best recommendation would be to manage your expectations. I talked about managing expectations when it comes to mystery snails, but I think it's very important that people manage their expectations. Eradication it's a lofty goal. It's an expensive goal. And even if eradication were achieved for something like Eurasian water milfoil, the likelihood of reintroduction is very high. And the reason why it's so high, as I said, is because the population is almost everywhere throughout Ontario. So, what the literature has shown and what I've been told is that all you need is a 6-inch strand, so about this big, of Eurasian water milfoil, even without roots, introduced into a water body to establish a population. So, again, if you're dealing with an entire water body of it, look to the resource that I'm going to send here shortly that walks you through steps and how you're allowed to manage that species on your shoreline. That being said, when you do manage something like Eurasian water milfoil, fragmentation is certainly a concern. So as I said, small strand, if you're pulling that out with rakes and you're not getting all of that biomass, you are certainly spreading that species. So there are other options as well, things like jute mats. I saw Procellacor brought up in the Q&A. Procellacor is very expensive based on my experience with the herbicide. So that is a consideration, but that is an option that does exist. But there are a number of hoops that a group would need to jump through in order to be allowed to apply Procellacor or even Reward. Those are the two herbicides that we are permitted to use at this time in the province. Now, that being said, I'm assuming Eurasian water milfoil is on the label for Procellacor. It must be. That being said, don't quote me. I know that it's on the label for Reward, but so options are fairly limited in respect to that species. But again, I don't want to dissuade people from wanting to do good. So if you're looking to work on managing Eurasian water milfoil on your lake, I fully encourage you to do it. But I do encourage you to follow the rules, again, that do exist, that are laid out by the provincial government, and to do your due diligence in terms of not spreading the species, because again, it spreads so easily via fragmentation. So hopefully I didn't dissuade anybody, but at the same time, there are other species that we need to be on the lookout for. We try to prioritize our resources because our resources are finite in the province to combat aquatic invasive species, including aquatic plants. So right now we're dealing with water soldier. We're dealing with water soldier in Lake Simcoe. We're dealing with hydrilla in Point Pelee. So those are relatively early detections, and those are very, aggressively spreading aquatic plants. And we heard Matt talk about them before. So these are where we're spending our resources, is trying to manage or eradicate those populations while just trying to prevent the introduction further of things like Eurasian water milfoil. So sorry, there's a lot in that answer. I hope that kind of hit on it a little bit, and I feel free to anybody else on the panel to jump in.
Thanks, Brooke. Anyone else have anything to chime in before we move to the next question? Alrighty, I'll move this one over to Emily Mitchell. I guess I have to be clear about that now. There's just a question here about a grow me instead guide for southeastern Ontario. I don't believe that exists, but maybe there's some helpful resources that you can point folks to who are looking for native plant options in their area.
I don't know if that was in reference to when I was talking about we're updating the southern guide. So that update is in progress. I don't know. We don't have a timeline for that. Yeah, we don't have a guide for southeastern Ontario. There's only the northern and southern, and kind of like it's a little bit arbitrary which guide that you're a part of. I can put some links in the chat for other resources as well, but the one that's being updated is going to be our Southern Grow Mainstead guide.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. Reminder for those on the call, if you want to put your questions in the chat, I will do my best to read them out. A pre-submitted question that we got, talking about how many folks, or maybe they're seeing that folks are writing articles stating that we should not put money and resources into invasive species removal, which everyone on this call is probably like, oh God, and let it take its course. Kind of what is our response to that? And I'm actually going to put Emily P on the spot. Emily does a ton of economics work, so I'm wondering maybe if you can just touch on, the economic impacts of invasive species should they go unchecked.
No. Yeah, how can I put this? So those species, like unchecked, they will have those economic impacts anyway. So, in my own presentation, obviously I mentioned, I mean, if spotted lanternfly were just allowed to totally proliferate uncontrolled, then, vineyard owners are going to lose their vineyards, right? And that has happened already, like to some extent, because it's a novel pest, and people had to quickly figure out how to respond to it. That takes it takes time, it takes trial and error, it takes resources to figure it out. But the damage can always be worse. So, we do want to control things as best as we can. That being said, certainly if we are going to put money somewhere, you always get more bang for your buck investing in prevention, which is why, in Canada, it's good, for example, that spotted lanternfly isn't really here yet. We're still at the preventative stage. And so we are investing in preventative, monitoring, training people to look out for it. So if we can detect it early and respond to it quickly, we do hope to mitigate those control costs. And that principle can certainly be applied to other invasives, including others that people have talked about today. I'm not sure if anyone else wanted to weigh in with their perspective, but yeah.
Great. Thanks, Emily. Anyone else wanting to chime in? I think you did a lovely job.
All sorts of
Brooke.
opinions on this one. I mean, it's easy for people to say, right? It's easy for people to say it's a waste of money, it's a waste of time, until it's in their backyard, or until it's in their shoreline, or until it's in their trees. And then they're ringing the bells going, whoa, why didn't we do something about this? So I would pray that people would check themselves when they make those types of statements, because people are dealing with invasive species in many different capacities all across Ontario. And as I mentioned, there's still hundreds of water bodies, thousands of water bodies that are not invaded by various invasive species that we're dealing with. Zebra mussels, despite being here since the early 90s, have not fully invaded all of the water bodies that they could invade. And that is in part due to all of the great preventative work that we do across the province. And as the Invasive Species Center has shown, there is a 1 to 100, economic return on prevention. So if you prevent something, you're spending 1% of what you would spend on it if you let it invade. So I think the logic here is that, these aquatic invasive species and terrestrial invasive species are called that for a very specific reason. We don't just willy-nilly decide what species are bad, albeit sometimes there are some gray areas, I will admit. But by and large, the species that are listed, for example, under the Invasive Species Act, are there for a reason. Risk assessments, socioeconomic risk assessments have been done and have determined that their overall impact to our society, environment, and economy would be great. An example is grass carp. I think the socioeconomic risk assessment on grass carp, which is one of the 4 invasive carps, showed that if we just went status quo and we didn't do anything about it, it would cost taxpayers, in Ontario, upwards of $50 billion by 2050. So that's lost to, environmental services, that's lost to ecotourism, that's lost to the fisheries. You know, the fisheries in the Great Lakes are worth about $8 billion annually. So again, it's very easy for us to put on these blinders and only look at our own situation and say, well, taxpayers' dollars are going to this, really? They should be going to something else. But, you know, the top 10 invasive species in Canada cost taxpayers in Canada $35 billion a year. So that's the top 10. And we have about 185 non-Indigenous aquatic species in the Great Lakes today, and we have over 445 terrestrial invasive species. So that number is far greater than 35 billion, but ECCC, Environment and Climate Change Canada, through their assessment, determined that 10 species, the top 10, of which I think Phragmites is included, cost Canada $35 billion. So if we had prevented those things from getting here in the first place, it probably would have been a lot cheaper to us. So, I mean, that's some of the things that I would say to that question.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I think the overall one is prevention is key. And, you know, by doing that, we're actually saving money in the long run. I'm going to bring Katie in here. There's a question submitted regarding the best strategy to raise awareness about the issue of aquarium trades, and including animals and aquatic plants, and some of the best ways to reach the sellers and the customers.
Yeah, this is a great question. I was thinking about it, and I think the best way is go right to the source. We do a lot of outreach in that kind of niche aquaculturist hobby. And we've done some, we've got into the Aquarium Association of Canada, Aquarium Club Association of Canada, and have done some presentations with them and have gotten really great feedback. We also have done, we do the pet shows every year, and that's like a really great place to do some proper outreach to the aquarium culture customers. And it's also a really great place to do outreach to the retailers. Additionally, we also have reached out to retailers across Canada through a retailer survey, and just asking certain questions on if they're aware of invasive species and what species they do sell. And then they get a retailer toolkit that gives them a pet owner fact sheet, some a little fish disposal pods, and some don't let it loose stickers. So outreach is key, and I think outreach to, you know, the specific customers are really important.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. Yeah, I would, you know, this one's kind of a fun one too, because you get to think of kind of the customer buying pathway that maybe we don't necessarily see in some other invasive species, although important. So yeah, just looking at that customer pathway, who is the customer who's buying it? You know, some folks are really educated already, but you know, you have first-time pet owners who are buying a goldfish as their first, you know, a pet for their child. And, you know, it's a little bit different than some other communications that we do. But I would really just encourage folks to think about their audience, think about the places that they look, what they're going to see in all of those different aspects, and how to get your message out in every single one of those, which Katie does a lovely job with through our Don't Let It Loose program. Awesome. Sorry, I got on my soapbox there for a little bit. I'm going to direct this one to Luke. Luke, how do we remove Phragmites without spreading seeds?
That's a great question. So the first thing I guess I'll direct to is a protocol that responsible practitioners across Ontario are using, called the Clean Equipment Protocol. So one of the first things that we want to establish when we're leaving a treatment site is how we're leaving the site. So you know, some organizations like contractors, for example, will have pressure washers that they'll wash their equipment at the site to reduce the spread of not only Phragmites, but any other bioagents that are, you know, contaminate on that equipment. There's other ways to prevent seed transmission. So for example, when there's biomass removal, this kind of ties in a little bit to what was discussed earlier with the cost associated with invasive species. When these species like Phragmites accumulates over time, it leaves a lot of vegetative biomass behind. And so efforts to remove the plant include removing that biomass. So things like removing the seed head before removal can really benefit the treatment site depending on the scale. So for example, if it's just a couple plants by the wetland, maybe a couple meters wide, the patch, that's something that's very achievable, where they can be collected and then disposed of. Typically, the disposal method for vegetation is to let it sit in a plastic garbage bag without access to air in the sun, and just kind of let that veg rot. There's also municipal sites that'll take vegetation and destroy it. So the removal of that head could be also done on a small scale to reduce that spread, but ultimately really it's about cleaning equipment for large scale projects. And that could be not necessarily just contractors, that also includes, cleaning your boat after you're in a water source that has Phragmites, something like that.
Awesome. Thanks, Luke. I know maybe there's a few comments of folks wanting to chat more about that. So maybe if you can pop your email in the chat for any follow-up questions, people can do that. The Clean Equipment Protocol is a great resource available on the Ontario Invasive Plant Council's website, and I'm sure links on others as well. So definitely encourage you to check that out. This next one, I am going to ask Matt. I want to learn more a bit about wetlands and invasive species and those links. Are there any, specific insights for how invasive species can impact the biodiversity of wetlands?
Oh, like the aquatic invasives I was talking about, or just invasive
Yeah.
species in general?
It's dealer's choice. You pick what you want to talk about.
The invasives in general, they reduce biodiversity because what makes them invasive is they grow really fast and they outcompete native vegetation. So you end up, especially in the plant community, with a real reduction of biodiversity. There was a photo at the very end of my presentation when I started talking about hydrilla that showed it was a photo taken this summer at Hillman Marsh where the hydrilla had gotten into the water and there was Phragmites present, and it was just all emergent Phragmites and all hydrilla in the water. And that was essentially, there were two species in that photo where there should be 40 or 50, right? And it's like, that's what invasive species does. It reduces that habitat quality and that biodiversity, which reduces invertebrate quality and fish and birds. And it's like a whole real cycle that just leaves you with, only a few species present. And that's not what we want. That's why we really have to be on top of it and, clean up invasives and prevent their establishment.
Thanks, Matt. And as your organization name would indicate, there's also a huge impact to the migratory bird populations, that rely on these wetlands.
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So, okay, my next question comes from the chat, and I'm sure so many people could answer this, but maybe I will start with Brooke on kind of the on-the-ground community science lens. But how can a group of volunteers, like a Rotary Club, get involved in invasive species awareness and removal?
Well, there's two different ways. You could either be completely independent and just look at, what other work has been done and then try to spearhead it yourself, which is, not what I would recommend. What I would recommend is that there are a lot of great invasive species organizations across the province, many of whom are sitting at this table or this meeting right now. And so I'm sure you could reach out to almost any one of us to get some ideas around, what can be done versus, what you're looking to do. If you're looking to do Phragmites removal, reach out to one of us. If you're looking to get involved in mystery snails, reach out. If you're looking to, other species, if there's something you're looking to do, just reach out, because we have the expertise. And if we don't have the expertise, we have the connections, right? If I can't do it, I'll connect you with somebody who can, and vice versa. So there's a lot of great resources at people's fingertips in regards to invasive species in the province. You just have to make that leap. You just have to take that step And looking back to the case study of the mystery snails, and not to, pump my own brakes again, but it was really just started with an email. It just started with somebody reaching out and saying, we have a problem. And then it just took a group of dedicated people with passion, with a desire to make a change, with, the willingness to dedicate their own time. That's all it took. And then before you knew it, we had 1.37 million mystery snails removed. And obviously that's a very niche one. But there are, similar stories like that. And you could be one of those groups who come forward and start a program like that. So it's just a matter of taking that leap, making that connection, asking those questions, and then going from there. And then, of course, now in terms of funding, there's all sorts of amazing, opportunities. The Invasive Species Action Fund, as delivered by the Invasive Species Center and the Ministry of Natural Resources, keep your eyes open for those types of things. And, because there are opportunities to get micro grants and to get, as little as $500,000 or 500 or 1,000, not 500,000. There are some that are maybe that big, but if you find one, please tell me. But there's these opportunities to get those little micro grants and to help your groups get off the ground and start these programs. So that's how I would start, is just reaching out. And then with that, I'll pass it over to anybody else who has some opinions.
Awesome. Thanks, Brooke. And I'm maybe going to put Emily on the spot if she can pop our community science program link in the chat. We have this program that really our goal is to bring together different events that community members can do from all types of organizations. So many folks on this call today, we love to feature events on the Invasive Species Center website. So please keep an eye on that. And it's a similar story. If you go to any one of our websites, you'll get a list of amazing opportunities that you can join in. But truly, it's as simple as also reporting, like learning how to identify and report. Lots of bio blitzes going on. So just going out and surveying your kind of landscapes and areas. So thanks, Em, for popping that in the chat. But I encourage everyone else on the call too to put your organization's links in there. But that's a really great place to start. Okay. I am going to send this next question to Emily Mitchell. Hoping you can talk us through some control actions for dog strangling vine.
So OIPC is more involved in the research aspect, like our best management practices guides and things like that. So we don't actually do on the ground removal of invasive plant species. So I encourage you to check out our dog strangling vine BMP that's going to be dated soon. But I think I'll throw it up to people who do the more on ground stuff with that invasive plant, as I don't do a lot of that aspect of it.
Awesome. I'll leave for folks to chime in, but I know as well the Ontario Invasive Plant Council's best management practices are just such an excellent place to start management. It outlines, everything that you can do for a particular population, at different scales of size of the population, all of that good stuff. So Emily, maybe you've already done it, but we could pop that link in the chat too, and folks can check that out.
I can take a little crack at it. If you're dealing with private residents with some dog strangling vine, I would first encourage you to, map out where it is, make sure that you understand the population you're dealing with. And then typically what you want to do is start managing from the outside of the population towards the center. Don't start from the center, so it'll just continue to spread. And look for opportunities to remove the plant, bag the plant, look for seed heads, right? If seed heads appear, snip those, get those into a bag. Usually double bagging is best, and then solarization. I heard somebody else mention solarization before. I think it was you, Luke. Solarization is key. So putting all of that plant material in bags, putting it out in the sun, making sure that bag's tied, making sure, it doesn't get out elsewhere, really making sure the plant is dead prior to it going to, the landfill. So those are some of the main things that I would do. There are opportunities for hiring herbicide applicators, but those things cost money and are on a case-by-case basis. So realistically, if you're dealing with a small population, you can certainly manage it yourself with some elbow grease. But keep in mind, managing expectations, there it is again. it is a very aggressive plant and is very difficult to eradicate. So with any pest management strategy that you're going to implement, you're going to want to at least, expect to be doing it for 3-4 years at a minimum. It takes time. It takes time to get that plant back to the point where it's going to eventually be eradicated from, let's say, your private residence. Exactly. And as was said in the chat, pick the DSV pods before they ripen. Yeah, making sure you get them before they go to seed, snipping those off, bagging, solarization.
Awesome. Thanks, Brooke. I'm going to put one final call out there as I see we're at 3:30. So if anyone has any last minute questions, please pop them in the chat or the Q&A, sorry, now. Otherwise, I will also open up to any of our speakers here who maybe want to add something that they didn't get the chance to talk about or something else that has come to mind after this discussion. Okay, I have one last question. So we'll do that one. So can solarized and other removed invasive species be sent to somewhere other than methane producing landfills?
I can touch on that one. So that's a great question. It can. I would just be critical of the site that you are putting the biomass. So, we're with NTC, we are fortunate that on some of our staging properties where we stage our equipment, we have, a gravel pit that is not near any kind of localized water source. It's protected from wind, and we can actively use it to dispose of rotting biomass. Some things like Phragmites, for example, in large cells can be removed. The biomass can be removed using a controlled burn. So it's not necessarily that they all have to be solarized, but typically solarized plants in the bags do end up in the landfill. I have had it in the past where some landfills will have you remove the biomass from the bags to be burned. It's kind of point of preference and ultimately about reducing the spread. But other people might have something to add there too.
Thanks, Luke, for that. I'll open to any other thoughts from the group.
Sorry, I'll tie in one more thing.
Yeah.
So this is actually not a local example, but there's some research preserves, international research preserves that use biodigesters to control encroaching native species and non-native species. So that is a very site-specific example, though.
Thank you. Yeah, I will, repeat some of the messages that we hear often, but this is quite a lively space of research, and, research is always being done to better improve invasive species management and removal and disposal methods. So I think it's conversations like this that are really helpful to, kind of put it on folks' radars, but, that research is happening in the background. So I would always say stay tuned and sign up for future events from this group, because that would likely be the first place that you're going to hear it. So with that, I think it's an excellent time to wrap up. So thank you to all of our speakers today who shared their knowledge and presentations with us. This is what Invasive Species Awareness Week is all about, is really getting that information, getting it percolating in your minds. And then, when it comes spring and we're all able to get outside, then we can put lots of this good knowledge into action, which is, again, was the whole point of this event. So thank you to everyone who joined us today. You're really doing your part in preventing the economy, environment, and society from invasive species. So just big shout out to everyone who was here and all of the great questions and dialogue that we had today. So the recording will be up and available on the Invasive Species Center YouTube channel. So please just head over there. I popped the link in the chat a bit earlier. If you want to rewatch any of this, but otherwise I will say thank you to our speakers and to everyone here, and have a lovely rest of your Thursday. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye
everyone.
now.